Nigeria is the second largest country in Africa and the most populous country in Nigeria. It's interesting to me because there are many tribes and 250 ethnic groups with distinct cultures and tradition. Nigeria has 500 indigenous languages that are spoken throughout the country, and English is the official language. Facts that could require special attention when trying to construct an ethical organization culture is Nigeria's risky business climate. Nigeria has high levels of corruption in private and public sector. Corruption amongst its government, political leaders, business leaders, and even bankers. Organizations in Nigeria often commit acts of corruption with bribery, fraud, corrupted governance practices. The common practice of nepotism is rampant in Nigeria's corporate workforce. Um, Basically, the corruption amongst the business leaders, political, is a major dilemma, more issue that as an organization leader I would have to deal with. Bribery is a moral issue I am likely to face as an organizational leader in Nigeria. Nigeria is a place, like I said, that has a high climate for corruption. I have pictures that depict the bribery that's occurring with a political leader to my right accepting money, and then you have a government office, a police office to my left that it's basically telling someone that hey, there's no more funding in the police department when he actually has money behind his desk. Nepotism is another issue I will likely face as an organization leader in Nigeria, and its impact of Nigeria's business and governance practices. Its management often does not is often not challenge employees. According to Masiki, managers in Nigeria use their position of power to favor relatives or friends to perform certain roles and responsibilities. So it's an issue in Nigeria where they have relatives in high places such as board of directors that interests that have their own self-interest, and bank officials or managers, a particular financial institution, might have their own agenda, their self-interest, and that is dangerous in the working environment. Bribery dilemma is a contractor meets with a Nigerian government official to discuss the contract. The Nigerian government official stated to the contractor that contracts are rewarded based on willingness to pay bribes and the highest bidder. Now, basically, Nigerian corruption is a major thing. This is something typical, a dilemma that happens to whether a local business owner or an international CEO from the United States are more likely to face a bribery dilemma. Moral decision making models step 3 and 4 combine have bribery stakeholders in their interests. The bribery stakeholders are the business owner or the contractor, government official, Nigerian citizens, and investors. Nigerian citizens will be probably like the not, I guess, indirect stakeholder, but yet they still could be impacted with this decision to pay a bribe or not to pay the bribe. The stakeholder's interest for the business owner or the contractor is to bid for a contract, to gain a contract. Government official is interested in maintaining wealth and power. Citizens of Nigeria could actually benefit what the business has to offer if this bribe is paid. This business could, operate in the communities of Nigeria, and the citizens can benefit of taxes, for example, for infrastructure. Then you have investors who have an interest in gaining profit or return, which is the norm. Anybody that's invested in a particular contractor is set to gain a profit if this contractor should get this bid. Depends on if he participate in this bribe. Nepotism dilemma is the Central Bank of Nigeria has five managing directors that were dismissed by Nigeria's governor due to fraud and misappropriation of shareholders' funds. These criminal offenses were committed with the help of family members and friends. So you have five bank managing directors that participate in corruption and basically put the shareholders' funds where they weren't supposed to be. So this is something that's typical in most Nigerian financial sectors. Nepotism, stakeholders, and their interests. The Nigerian government concern for the economy, shareholders, concerns about missing or misplaced funds, bank directors are interested in power and access to financial information, employees and relatives are concerned about employment or status. Nepotism is very rampant in the Nigerian workforce. The government is concerned, as a stakeholder, he's concerned about the economy. That's his interest. Shareholders, their interest in about the concerns of their misplaced funds. Bank directors are interested in power and access to financial information, which they could use to their own privilege. Employees and relatives are concerned about employment or status. All employees, whether related or non-related, all are concerned about their positions or roles. Non-employees are especially concerned because they are the minority if you have corruption, or if they're not partaking in corruption, or if they're not high on the totem pole. So relatives are employed. They're related to managers, directors. They are all concerned about keeping their employment status, abiding by the position of authority, which happens to be a relative of them or a friend. That's why they're concerned about, their status. Alternative actions for bribery. The contractor decides to not pay the bribe. The contractor decides to pay the bribe. Those are two alternative actions in this scenario. More decision making. Step 5. Alternative actions for nepotism. The government should have all financial institutions follow the CAMA Act 1990. The central bank should follow the framework of Nigeria's Economic Cooperation and Developments of 2004. New company policy would prohibit related employees of bank directors and management to be excluded from roles and responsibilities of authority. So this sums up the actions that need to take place for Central Bank of Nigeria and other non-financial and financial institutions in order for them to avoid nepotism. The government has regulations in the CAMA Act. Well, this is a act or a legal guidelines that provides legal framework for all institutions of Nigeria. The central bank should follow the framework of Nigeria's economic cooperation developments. This is involving in corrupt acts and how to identify. The new company policy would prohibit related employees of bank directors and management to exclude basically their friends and families from roles that conflict or cause conflict of interest within the company. So they should not be performing the roles or duties of a board member when you have a uncle, cousin that is the CEO of the banking institution or the organization. Step 6 of the more decision model, pros for bribery. The contractor can do business in Nigeria and increase in profits for shareholders or investors. Nigerian citizens will have the opportunity for employment. All those pros sound great for something that's an act that's considered a crime or corruption. The contractor can do business in Nigeria if he is for the bribe. Increasing profits for shareholders is a possibility. Nigerian citizens will have the opportunity for employment. The Nigerian citizens in the community could possibly be employed. So that is something that the contractor will have to consider in this dilemma. For bribery, the contractor will be violating the Nigerian constitution. The contractor is not required to keep the terms of the contract. Paying the bribery would limit the funds for resources for Nigerian citizens. So the cons for not deciding not to pay the bribe, the contractor, if he should pay the bribe, he is violating the law of the Nigerian constitution. The contractor is not required to keep the terms of the contract. So, by the contractor, if he decides to make this payment as bribe, he's probably under the assumption that, hey, he doesn't have to perform his obligations to the community of the citizens of Nigeria. He doesn't have to keep a promise to fulfill his duty to perform a function properly. He can renege, he can back out of a contract or say, hey, I paid you this. So it causes a whole lot of drama when you're dealing with corruption such as bribery. Paying the bribery would limit the funds for resources for Nigerian citizens. Yes, the bribe would hinder the Nigerian citizens from obtaining the benefits, purposes of having a organization or firm or this contractor in the community of Nigeria. So they will be missing out essentially on those resources that that company could provide for its citizens. Could be through a number of things from jobs, also to better build infrastructure. Moral decision making, step 6 for pros for nepotism. Bank directors can rely on friends and family to be loyal to them and the company. Nepotism allows directors and managers to remain in power. This could go either way. That second one, nepotism allows directors and managers to be in power. That could be a good or a bad thing. It could be a good thing, maybe impossible if it is a good leader, a good manager, or in this case, a good bank director. If they have people that think highly of them, they could remain in power. It's similar to like a political figure. If they do everything right for their constituents, as far as stand by what they believe in, they could possibly remain in office. So even though nepotism is a more issue in Nigeria, it has two sides where it can be used for good, or it could benefit a company if that leader, manager, director is an ethical one, or has morality. Where in this case, it's really for nepotism as being a more issue. It's really just saying that favoritism allows directors and managers to remain in-house, to remain in power. And that nepotism can come from a board director, um, you know, uh, even a political leader, or sorry, government official. But bank directors can rely on friends and family to be loyal to them in the company. Yeah, if that person, that leader is a ethical person, is doing the right thing, is morally right and sound, then yes, a family member that happens to be employed that is ethically sound, morally right, could be a good thing. They could be loyal to doing the right thing and following the protocols of that company, with the influence of a family related, family member in a higher position, such as a bank director or a manager. But at the same time, it can be something that could be a negative effect as well. Step 6 of moral decision making, cons for nepotism. Violates the policy for Central Bank of Nigeria, violates the international accounting standards. Bank managers or not directors often discriminate against other non-related employees. Non-compliance of the CAMA Act of 2006. Violation of the Central Bank of Nigeria. They have a set of guidelines that were enforced or improved by the governor of Nigeria. So this particular bank is a state bank, and they're failing to follow their code of corporate governance, or best code of corporate governance practice. So they're not following their own guideline, basically. Violations of violate the international accounting standards. Yes, misappropriation of funds is a violation of the international accounting standards. So apparently there is some non accountability within the organization, the bank itself, with accounting practices. Their standards that doesn't meet the qualifications of this particular act. Bank managers or directors often discriminate against other non-related employees. Yes, they do and they can. It doesn't help if you have a cousin, aunt, or whatever that is either an employee or, even worse, an employee of a rank, such as a bank manager or director. So pretty much if you have bank managers or director or supervisors that are in for doing unethical and immoral acts or having more issues with an organization, a non-employee that speaks up against it, it's like the marginal employee, the odd person out, because they're speaking up against a bank manager. They're going against the grain of doing bad for the company. Non-compliance of the CAMA Act 2006 gives all the legal framework of how the corporate governs, how a bank, a financial institution is supposed to be ran, and their non-compliance. Apparently, if you're doing anything with misappropriating funds, you're not following the legal framework. More decision making model. Step 7: conflicting principles of bribery. The organization specific principle of profitability conflicts with the moral principle of honesty. The moral principle of self improvement conflicts with the moral principle of harm prevention. The moral principles of utility and maximization conflicts with the moral principle of universalizability. Okay, going with the principle of profits. The company is conflicting in making immoral or having more issues in this situation with bribery. The contractor represents the company. So if he goes and engages in this deceptive act of bribery, he is taking profit over honesty. So he's not earning his keep, or he's performing and engaging in deceptive behavior. He's not being honest. The moral principle of self-improvement conflicts with moral principle of harm prevention. I went back and forth with this. Basic self-improvement is about oneself. It's not really about as anybody but oneself, to make sure that you do non-injury, you practice beneficency, and also I believe maybe harm prevention as well. But in this case, harm prevention overrides self-improvement, because harm prevention is about preventing bad things from happening. So in this case, harm prevention overrides self-improvement, because the briber, if he does not pay this bribe, he is preventing harm from happening to him. The moral principle of utility maximization conflicts with the moral principle of universality. Similarities in somewhat principles, but in this case, he must choose, in this case, universalizability overrides utility maximization, because you're not really doing good if you're getting something through a crime or through a unethical practice such as bribery. So in this case, you can't choose doing a bad act such as being deceptive in business dealings to say, okay, well, this overrides. So in this case, universalizability, the way the manager or the contractor should behave is the moral standard of this principle, and that's the principle that overrides utility maximization. More decision-making model. Step 7: conflicting principles of nepotism. Nepotism, the dilemma of the moral principle of benefits conflicts with the moral principle of non-injury. The moral principle of special care conflicts with the organization-specific principle of vulnerability and privacy. The organization-specific principle of profitability conflicts with the moral principle of respect for rights. Okay, so basically the moral principle of beneficency is to do good, and the moral principle of non-injury is do not do harm to others. So The moral principle of non-injury rise the principle of beneficence, because the contractor in this situation needs to make sure that he does no harm, and that means not engaging in deceptive behavior. The moral principle of special care conflicts with the organization-specific principle of vulnerability and privacy. All right, special care is something that's usually not a principle that you really want to use in business. Vulnerability and privacy is a principle that is about respecting, promoting fairness amongst employees, not abusing your position of power, such of these bank directors in the nepotism dilemma, or using their power to influence employees that happen to be friends and families. So in this case, vulnerability and privacy overrides special care conflict, because special care is an act of honor, and the situation with the dilemma of nepotism, the act of honor, because that's Uncle Leroy who's the CEO, or that's Tony who's my cousin who's the bank director. I'm going to be honored by him, even though it's against the guidelines for an ethical organization. So vulnerability and privacy override special care. The organization-specific principle of profitability conflicts with moral principle of respect for rights. Okay, respect for rights. Everybody has a position, has respect for rights for who they are, for their position. The bank directors, they have a respect for rights because they are bank directors, but really, truly, what I'm trying to explain is that the bank directors use their position as a way to say, hey, I'm making the right decision. This is my decision. That decision was not for good. It was for, misappropriating funds, doing an unethical practice. But the organization principle of profitability conflicts with the moral principle of rights. So profits and revenue were the main center focus of these 5 banking directors in Central Bank Nigeria. That was their main focus. It wasn't about the respect for rights for the shareholders, which I'm really talking about is that you're violating. You should never violate anybody's respect for rights. You should never violate anybody's autonomy or well-being. And in this case, the banking directors did that. They violate the rights they didn't respect these shareholders' property or their funding by the actions that they took. Applicable principles for bribery, which is step 8 in the moral decision-making model. The moral principles of harm prevention of a criminal offense. The moral principle of honesty is applicable because the contractor would rather meet the requirements of Nigeria. Basically, Nigerian business or law. He wants to be honest in about his business dealings and not engage in harmful act, a corrupt act of bribery. The moral principle of universality applies to the contractor's conduct as a moral standard to behave in business. So those 3 pretty much sum or what the applicable principles that should be applied in this case of bribery. Applicable principles for nepotism. This is step 8. Still again, in moral decision-making model, the moral principle of non-injury will be appropriate to prevent misappropriation of shareholders' funds. The organization-specific principle of vulnerability and privacy is applicable to prevent bank directors from abuse of nepotism. The moral principle of respect for rights is applicable and important for bank directors to consider the autonomy of shareholders. So basically, starting with the first point, the moral principle of non-injury is to do no harm. And this would be appropriate to prevent the mishap of mishandling shareholders' funds. So this will be something that a principle is applicable in this dilemma, in this nepotism dilemma. And also, yes, so the organization-specific principle of vulnerability and privacy, once again, it's not the bank directors abusing their authority and their power and their position to abuse nepotism, to appoint someone or suggest or recommend or tell recruiters, hey, I want my sister to be hired. That is a way, if the supervisor, the bank directors, and management in this case they're all corrupt or in cahoots with each other, and you add a family member that has shady dealings or just not a great character, then you have the abuse of nepotism, you have the corruption continue to spread in the organization. So that is what nepotism. When the bank directors or anybody in high authority in Nigeria, they use their power to manipulate and control subordinates. The moral principle of respect for rights is applicable because the bank directors didn't consider, it wasn't considered, about the shareholders, about their rights, what their respect for rights are. It never was. It was just simply about what the directors wanted to do, and they did the act of misappropriating funds. So respect for rights, you should never violate anybody's space, anybody's rights at all, period. And so the shareholders, this this applicable principle would apply to this, to the applicable principle for nepotism. All right, you have step 9, more decision-making model, preferable action on bribery. Okay, so the preferable action is not to pay the bribe. The preferable action is justified by the moral principles of honesty, harm prevention, and universal liability. The moral principle of honesty is evident in the bribe not being paid. The contractor prevented harm from happening that could have resulted in criminal corruption. The contractor knew if monies had been given to the government official, then the citizens of Nigeria could not have received the benefits of the company. The contractor conducted in a way that we all should do if faced with a moral issue of bribery. So, the action of not to pay the bribe is the best action to take. Harm prevention, you're preventing harm from happening. And he did that. He or she, if they don't pay the bribe, have prevented the harm of themselves, and probably the harm of the community of Nigeria, in a way of no more corrupted leader gets to take advantage of a contractor or business owner. The contractor knew if monies had been given to the government officials, then the citizens of Nigeria would have not received the benefit of the company. Absolutely right. There have been instances in Nigeria where political figures, leaders, have taken monies and supposed to be for the infrastructure of Nigeria or to build a facility, and instead of putting the money towards that, it went into their own personal bank account. So you have bribes that are rampant in Nigeria. And so basically the principle of corporate social responsibility would have been lacking. Basically, this contractor would have paid the government official. And then you have a contractor conducted in a way that we all should do if faced with a moral issue. Yes, the universal liability principle, a moral principle, is the moral act or standard for any organizational leader or leader, whether it's political or private, to act or behave if they are faced with an moral issue or dilemma. More decision-making model step 9, the preferable action for nepotism. The preferable action to deal with the moral issue of nepotism is a company policy that will prohibit related employees of bank directors or management to be excluded from roles of authority and responsibilities. This policy would minimize the effect of nepotism in the Nigerian workforce. The moral principle of harm prevention was not included in central bank's corporate governance practices. The bank director did not respect the rights of the shareholders and chose profitability over the shareholders' autonomy. The principle of accountability is a priority to the international accounting standards, and it was not applied in banking processes. Central bank failed to disclose financial reports to shareholders. So once again, all this sums up or justifies the reason why the preferable action would be to start a company policy that would prohibit related employees of bank directors and management to be giving roles of authority and responsibilities. This is a conflict of interest. And when you have leaders that already have corrupted tendencies, an employee that's on the fence or is not the ethical employee, they happen to be related to that chairman or that bank director, it's a conflict of interest. So the moral principle of harm prevention was not even included because they didn't prevent harm from happening. They did harm. They misappropriate funds of their shareholders. And central bank corporate government practices weaken. It was weak and allowed this to occur, that action to occur with the five banking directors. The principle of accountability is lacking in this dilemma. Central bank did not meet the standards to the international account standards. It was not applied in their banking practice. It wasn't applied that day or whenever that happened when they misappropriate funds. And then when you're doing nepotism of favors or whatever favoritism, the bank failed to disclose financial reports to shareholders. So their favorite employees, whoever's in the accounting department or whatever does the keeps up with the finances of that particular bank, if they happen to be not an ethical, sound employee, and if they're related to an employee that's definitely not an ethical person, or make bad moral decisions, then you're gonna have two or whatever, how many people, in cahoots with corruption. So the nepotism plays a role in all these things that I just listed because they basically prevent management from being held accountable for their actions. Nepotism allows the bank directors to choose profits over the rights of the shareholders. Nepotism favors by board directors, investors, even investors. Hey, since they could be, not necessarily choosing shareholder because they've taken their funds, but meaning other businesses they might be in cahoots with. When I say cahoots, they might be affiliated with. They might choose them over this particular bank over another bank. But basically, all these actions are needed to combat nepotism in Nigeria. Sorry, excuse me.